Thank you all for coming today to this talk with Mr. David Armstrong. I came here as a fan today. I was going to just park myself down and sit, and I was reminded that, oh, I need to do an intro. So I'm Allison, I'm the executive director here, and I want to thank you. A couple of little housekeeping notes. Our season brochure came out. If you haven't received a copy of this, we have extras here. It's the full lineup of shows that we're going to be doing this entire season, which extends through June. We'll probably add a few surprises. But what we're most proud of is two things. We are making a priority even bigger with youth access, and 90% of our shows are free for youth, making it very affordable for families, and more free events like the one that you're experiencing right now here today. But it's also our 60th anniversary as an organization, so it's a big year for us. And do pick some shows, come and see them. And if you enjoy today's event and want to encourage more free events, there is a donation box by the door. We welcome your gifts. David and I have known each other since 2019 when I first started working here. He was a board member, and when I found out that he was a former executive director at Fifth Avenue Theater, and as I was stepping into the role as ED, he became a lifesaver for me. I cannot tell you how many times I would call him up and say, what did you do when this happened at Fifth Avenue? It was a journey for me, but he has been a mentor and a friend through that whole time. Watching him start teaching at the UW and begin working on this book was a delight to just sit there and hear the updates and to see it reach this fruition. I take great pride in knowing you, David. So please welcome David Armstrong.
Thank you, Allison. It's so great to be here. I also want to introduce Albert Evans, who will be joining me today. Albert. I'll talk more about him as we go along. Actually, this is your mic, Albert. Take that. That's fine. Actually, that wasn't mine. Here we go. So, thank you again for coming. Thank you, Allison and VCA, for hosting this event today. It's very exciting to get to talk about something that was 2 years in the making for me, and really 40 years in the making, as we'll talk about a little bit. If you don't know Albert, Albert is my longtime friend. I don't know what year we met. 20 years, yes, a long time ago.
Very long time.
19, yes. And Albert we met in New York. We worked on many projects together. We've written musicals together. And then when I came to the Fifth Avenue in 2000, I started bringing Albert out because he was a font of knowledge in music and in theater history and in so many things. He really runs the gamut. And so we kept coming out to the Fifth Avenue to work on projects, and finally he just moved to Seattle because it was easier than flying him out here every time. And joined the staff of the Fifth Avenue Theater in the education department and in the music department in so many capacities. If you ever listen to my podcast, Broadway Nation, you've heard Albert. He is the frequent co-host and font of knowledge on there. And it's been an honor to have him join me and he was so much a part of the creation of this book, just in terms of advice, and some of it is based on things that we wrote together along the way. And so it's just been wonderful to have him as my partner in crime to talk about this book. So I'm going to turn it over to Albert to kick us off here to talk about Broadway Nation, how immigrant, Jewish, queer, and Black artists invented the Broadway musical.
Well, it's not so much a script, it's a reminder of what my name is. I'm at that age. So David, you've written a book.
I have written a book.
You've written a book, and it's called Broadway Nation. Here it is.
Yeah.
The giant book. So let's start
in several ways, a giant book, yeah.
Let's start with the details. Why did you write this book? What was the inspiration, the impetus for writing a book?
Absolutely. I've never written a book before, so I've done a lot of things in my 40-year career in professional theater, but writing a book was was not one of them until now. So it started because when I left the Fifth Avenue in 2018, I was there for 18 years, from 2000 to 2018, and when I stepped down from there, the University of Washington School of Drama invited me asked me if I would be interested in teaching a course about the history of the Broadway musical at the UW. And of course I was very interested, but then I had to figure out what kind of course was I going to teach, what was it going to be, what was the focus of it. There are a lot of different ways to teach the history of the Broadway musical. So as I started developing that course, and I started teaching it in 2019, it went very well. It's turned into a big lecture course with 100 students. I've taught it every year since then, and it's become very popular. It fills up. It's in demand, partly because it fills two requirements, but I'll take credit for it being people liking it as well, and getting good good reviews for it, as we say. As I was doing that, in my mind, I thought, well, these lectures that I'm creating and this approach that I'm taking about, which is really captured in the subtitle, the course at the University of Washington has a very similar title. It's called The Broadway Musical, How Immigrant Jewish Queer and Black Artists Invented America's Signature Art Form. So right from the beginning, I had this concept and this idea, and then needed to, as I did the research for it, needed to prove the thesis, prove to myself that this idea was actually true, and it's more true and more real than I ever could have imagined as I delved into it. We'll talk more about that as we go along. So I had this idea that I could take these lectures, or the ideas of these lectures, and turn them into sort of more general audience-friendly podcast episodes, and start a podcast on this same theme and the same subject. So I started working on that, and then we got to then the pandemic came, and I knew I was going to have, or I found out I was going to have to teach the course remotely. So I sort of put the, fast forward on that stuff, because I thought I can use these podcasts as part of my course when I can't be teaching in person. That turned out to be really effective and well, and I still use the podcast as part of this course, even though we're back in teaching it in person. Exactly. Along the way, so the first season of the podcast Broadway Nation is basically a chronological history of the Broadway musical from the late 19th century to today. And then I thought, well, what am I going to do now for season 2? Luckily, and 3 and so on, luckily there were a bunch of other writers writing really terrific books about the history of Broadway, but about very specific subjects, either specific people or specific shows or specific times in that same thing. So the podcast largely has become an interview podcast since then, where I get a chance to talk to these incredible artists. Somebody was here speaking to me earlier, so we just did a series with an author who wrote a book called How Sondheim Can Change Your Life. And it's a fantastic book, and he was fantastic to talk to. I turned it into 5 episodes, actually. And so that's what the second season became. And I had thought along the way about maybe self-publishing or doing something like that, because that's, a lot of people do that these days. But luckily, it went the way I always hoped it would go. The publisher and editor at Mathew and Drama, which is an imprint of Bloomsbury Publishing. And Mathew and Drama, if you've ever been involved, anybody who's been in the theater, this has been a company that's been around for 100 years publishing plays. They're very, very well established in that little niche world of drama publishing. I had interviewed a number of authors of books that they published, and the publisher became aware of me and my course and the podcast and approached me about whether I would be interested in writing a book. So that was really, it was a great way for it to happen and to be asked to do it. Of course, how could I say no? I would not recommend writing a 400-page book as your first book if you've never done one before, but that's what it needed to be. They wanted a comprehensive history of the Broadway musical through this lens, which means there's actually more information in it than in a typical history of the Broadway musical, because I'm trying to push to the center shows and people, especially artists, creators, who often get sort of left out or not, because there's so much to talk about, have been forgotten about to a certain extent. So a lot of it was to recenter these particularly marginalized people into the mix and demonstrate how important they actually are and why they should be, why we should focus on them as much as we do on the usual suspects. So that was the challenge of writing the book, was how do you contain all of that in a book that isn't 800 pages. So my publisher, Donald Hanlon at Mathew, was very, very helpful in structuring the book and figuring that out. So then it took about 2 years to actually write it and do more. There's a lot more in the book than is in my course or on my podcast. So there's a lot of new research that had to be done, or new to me research that had to be done to create the book. So I think I answered your question probably well, more than enough.
I have no idea. And it took a lot longer than was originally projected, right?
Yes, I mean, I would say a lot longer, but absolutely, yes, there was, I think this, and my publisher and my editor was not surprised when he said nobody ever meets their contracted deadlines when they write a book. Almost nobody. So yes, we pushed things along, but I think I was probably 6 months after what the contract said in terms of getting it all turned in, which apparently is, you know, people who didn't even start the book by the time they're
and because Bloomsbury, Mathew, and their idea was that it would also be used as a textbook. So there are only certain times of year that you traditionally publish a textbook. So that also had to do with the deadlines.
Absolutely, they were trying to make sure I met those deadlines.
Yeah.
Bloomsbury Academic, it's a big company, and they have several different divisions, but academic is the main one behind this, and their intention is this will be adopted as a new textbook for teaching the history of the Broadway musical. So hopefully that will happen. But I just want to emphasize that I don't come from the academic world. Originally, I come from the professional theater. I don't particularly like academic speak. I always wonder why can't we use a regular word rather than a word that's something. It's a turnoff to me. So I didn't write the book. The book is very academic, but it's not written in an academic manner. I wanted to write a popular history of the Broadway musical that would be very accessible to fans, but also something that could be used as to teach with. So I think hopefully people seem to feel like I've accomplished that pretty well. And one of the hardest things about writing it was, for most of the writing I had done, certainly for the podcast and even for the course, I didn't need to cite anything. I didn't need to document things along the way. So for this book, every single fact had to be documented and cited. So in some ways, I was often having to figure out, how do I know that? And where did this quote come from? I know this quote, and I included it in this, but where did I get it to begin with? So I was having to backtrack all that stuff. And that was literally the hardest part of writing the book, was having to make sure everything was cited and accurate and academic along the way. So it was an interesting process. I won't make that mistake again. When if I write another book, I'll make sure I've got everything along the way documented.
Keep the receipts.
Keep the receipts, exactly.
So how did your book is structured in a very interesting way. How did you settle on this structure, and how does it help to tell the story of these marginalized groups of people who were really the foundation of the American musical?
Absolutely. So the book is structured in 5 acts, as I call them, and so 5 sections. And to do that, and I started this when I was teaching the course, there are surprisingly, in the history of the Broadway musical, there are different epochs, different eras of the Broadway musical. Everyone will agree on that, but almost no scholars or historians will agree on what to call them or when they happened or when they acted. And so an example is, you'll often, in almost every book, you will hear some reference to the golden age of Broadway. But almost nobody agrees about when that was. What are the dates that define it, or did it even ever happen? So some books will, and what's even more confusing is that people who do talk about the golden age of Broadway, some people will say it starts in the 1920s and goes to the 1960s, which for me is too big of a time span to teach effectively, number one. And also, right in the middle of that is a giant change in the way musicals are done, and the way musicals happen. So part of the structure came looking at those turning points. What are the turning points in the form of the music? This would be the same thing if you were talking about art history or any other kind of history of some other art form. When does it change? When does a new generation take a different tactic on it and approach it a completely different way? So that's what I started thinking about. So back to the golden age of Broadway, just as an example, if you were just talking about the songs, if we were just talking about the Great American Songbook, which is, these incredible trove of songs that came from Broadway musicals and that we still cherish, and everything from, from Rodgers and Hart to Sondheim, then yes, you could say that's all the golden age of Broadway song. But if you're talking about the musicals, they're very different. So I thought, well, I'm going to divide this first section into what I invented the name the Silver Age of Broadway, to be able to talk about it. And then the golden age of Broadway for me starts with the opening night of Oklahoma, which is a little bit of a cliche, but it's absolutely true. That's when things change immensely, substantially, partly because Oklahoma runs 4 times longer than any other show ran before it. So it got people's attention. It was like, oh, something about this show is what audiences want to see, is what audiences are responding to. And then by the time we get to the Carousel and the next set of Rodgers and Hammerstein shows, everybody has to get on board with this new way of writing shows, which is called the musical play, which they call the musical play. So then I thought, well, what's before that? What's about the Silver Age, which is the age of the musical comedy and the revue, which produced so many great songs, but almost none of those shows today. There are 300 musicals produced in what I call the Silver Age of Broadway, and only about 3 of them are ever done today. You will ever see a production of today. Anything Goes would be the best example of a show from that period that still gets done and revived. And that's because what changed along the way was this focus of focusing on the story. What Rodgers and Hammerstein and some other people, they can get all the credit. There were other people on the same wavelength in the late 30s, early 40s, heading in this similar direction about what do we want to change, what kind of shows do we want to see, and what kind of shows do we want to write. And it was making, and you've said this, quote that, what did Richard Rodgers say about Oklahoma? I've heard you say this many times, how the scenery and
that everything matched. It wasn't like you would have townspeople, but in a traditional musical comedy, like all the girls would be wearing the same dress, so they could do a unison dance routine. And the boys also would be very similar to, be squires to the girls. Oklahoma had people on stage. Every person in the chorus was actually a person, a character. And so they looked different.
And I think Roger said the music sounded like the scenery, and the scenery felt like the dialogue, and it just was all of a piece.
Like everything matched. The
everything went to, and we talk about that being integrated is the word that got used, the integration of the Broadway musical. And prior to that, in the Silver Age, everything is serving the songs and the stars. And the story really didn't matter. The The story was only there to serve, to show off these great stars and showcase these great songs. And that's why we don't do those shows anymore, because they just, and without the stars, especially the shows, there weren't really characters, there were stars playing characters. And very few of them survived. So, I know I've gone on,
Yeah.
but so there are 5 sections. I talk about the Genesis period of the Broadway music, which basically runs from 1890 something to the end of the First World War, but really to the opening night of Shuffle Along. And Shuffle Along is a show that we might have heard of, although it had some very famous songs. It opens in 1921, and it's written by black artists, directed by black directors, choreographers, starring black stars, and it really introduces jazz to the Broadway musical. It's right as jazz is emerging in the years just before that, and within a few years, every Broadway show will be infused with jazz music written by both black and white artists. So that's a turning point. That's a change in the way musicals are done. And then the next change for me, so the Silver Age then continues to Oklahoma, and then Oklahoma, the Golden Age continues until the opening night of Hair in 1968 on Broadway, which is again a giant change. Even if people didn't feel it at the time, you can look back and say, well, that changed the way and the musicals are done. And again, part of it is generational. Every generation, and sometimes they're not so young, but it's still a new generation of artists, is responding to, reacting to, rebelling in some cases against the way things, the previous generation's way of doing it, and sometimes looking back to their grandparents' way of doing it and adopting methods from there, which certainly happened in the 60s. So that Hair for me starts what I call the modern era of Broadway, which continues up to today with a sort of subcategory of the 21st century. Again, there's a slight change in focus at the beginning of the 21st century that also continues up today. So those are the 5 elements of my book, except then in the middle of all that, there's what I call the intermission section, and it is to highlight another focus of what I'm talking about, which is the Broadway musical is this strange kind of thing. It's like a medieval craft. It is passed down from hand to hand, from one person to the next, for 125 years. I mean, literally from one person. You can trace those connections. And there are many, many places we can trace the connections. For the middle of the book, I chose one of those, what I call legacy chains, to focus on and to highlight, because it is probably the clearest one, but it's only one of many. And so in that section, we start talking about a man named Otto Harbach, whose name may not be familiar to you, but he was a lyricist and a book writer starting in the late teens, basically, so he's very prominent in the 20s, and you would know some lyrics. He wrote the lyrics to Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. So if you've ever heard that song, that's Otto Harbach. He wrote 100 more songs that were fantastic. So he works for, and this is another sort of legacy chain, is Oscar Hammerstein I is a Russian Jewish immigrant who comes to New York and opens theaters and is a sort of a legend in his time as a theatrical entrepreneur, a theatrical impresario. He has 2 sons who one becomes focused on vaudeville, runs the most successful vaudeville theater in New York. The other one is focused on musical comedies. And the one who focuses on musical comedies is the uncle of Oscar Hammerstein II, who will become Rodgers and Hammerstein. That's the Hammerstein we talk about there. So his own father tries to keep him out of show business, as this is a recurring story, and you'll hear something about that in a minute. He finally gets his uncle to let him, enter what's really the family business. And his uncle matches him up with Otto Harbach to learn how to write musicals, to learn how to write the libretto, learn how to write lyrics. So they work together on a number of shows, big hit shows like The Desert Song, things that were like, The Desert Song is one of the longest running shows of the 1920s. It's this incredible education that he's able to receive, working education, apprenticeship basically. Then eventually he goes off on his own and the first show he creates after he goes off on his own is Showboat, one of the most important musicals in the history of Broadway. Then through fate he becomes the mentor of Stephen Sondheim. From when Sondheim is a young boy, he's a friend of his son. They, just like so many people become friends with people because their sons go to school together. These two boys happen to connect together because the adults knew each other. And Sondheim literally becomes the mentee of Oscar Hammerstein. And we go into great detail, but he actually teaches him a course practically in how to do that. Then Stephen Sondheim will turn around because of this gift that's been given to him and be the mentor to a number of significant writers of today. Most prominently, and the one I like, is Lin-Manuel Miranda, who he is very instrumental in helping and coaching and advising. Lin-Manuel Miranda talks about that. So in these four people, Otto Harbach, Oscar Hammerstein II, Stephen Sondheim, Lin-Manuel Miranda, basically encompass the entire history of the Broadway musical in these four individuals. And it's fascinating, I hope, to follow that path and see how one person handed it off to the next person, doing very, very different kinds of shows, very different things. Oscar Hammerstein is not doing the same kinds of shows that Otto Harbach was doing, develops a whole different approach, but it's based in what he learned there, and the same thing all the way to Lin-Manuel Miranda. So that's the centerpiece of the book.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to learn the rules before you break them.
Well, I think that is the key to art, is that you have to do that. And then you can break all the rules, but they knew. Lin-Manuel Miranda knows what the rules are and is immersed in the history of Broadway, and his favorite show is Fiddler on the Roof. He loves Fiddler on the Roof. In fact, at his wedding, there's a great video on YouTube you can see of his wedding where I remember for his father-in-law, they performed Fiddler on the Roof. There's one number from that at the reception and stuff like that.
In writing this book, what surprised you? What made you think, oh, I'd actually never realized that before? I'm educating myself.
There was a lot. There was a whole lot. We talked a little bit about the black artists, and I'll just briefly touch on that now. What I did not know, and I thought I knew everything about the Broadway musical, not literally, but I knew a lot, and same thing with you. We both discovered some of these things together. What is really, I don't think, been highlighted in anything I've seen before is that right at the beginning, in fact, the first show I'm going to talk about of this group was in 1899. There is a 10-year period of black musical theater on Broadway, created by black artists, starring black artists, directed by black artists, produced in many cases by black artists, and there's about 20 shows that happen in this period that we have just fallen off the radar, have completely fallen. And they're happening, and these are hit shows. These are important hit shows, perceived as hits. So they're happening at the same time that George M. Cohan and Otto Harbach and other people are doing their shows, and they're interacting with them. The artists are interacting with one another. So I just had no idea about that particular decade. And then the same thing we talked about Shuffle Along a second ago. There's another decade that starts with 1921, the Shuffle Along, that also produces more than 20 shows. Again, all by black artists, all hit shows, and that have a tremendous impact on the Broadway musical that just doesn't generally get talked about. One story I love to talk about these interactions between people is Shuffle Along becomes a big hit. It's the second longest running show of the 1920s. And they have to add a midnight matinee, is what they call it, really at 11:30 on a Wednesday night, so that all the people working on Broadway and all the other shows, all the white artists, could come to see it. People wanted to see it, and in fact, Irving Berlin came multiple times and would always sit front row center, so he was sitting right behind the conductor, who was Eubie Blake, the composer of Shuffle Along, so he could talk to Eubie during the show and interact with him. And it's that kind of interaction that I'd love to, I think I've more than scratched the surface on that, but there's a lot more I'd love to know about the interaction between the artists. So what was the question? Oh, what else did I discover? So yeah, so and the other thing is the contributions of women to the, and there's, even though, of course, like any other endeavor in the 20th century, women are not as much as at the table as much as the men are, they're still at the table substantially more than we think they were. And throughout the whole history of the Broadway musical, there are a couple of people like Dorothy Donnelly, who you'll find in the book, who were writing and actually directing Broadway musicals. She wrote the book and the lyrics for a number of giant hits in the 20s and the teens and the 20s, right from the beginning. And she's not the only one. So I tried to highlight, even though they're not in the title, because they're actually in all the women are part of all those other groups. So we had it in the title originally, but it just seemed weird to say immigrant, Jewish, queer, black, and women artists, because well, it just didn't make sense. So, but women are as much a part of this as possible. And in fact, we're going to have some, couldn't talk about Broadway without having some musical performances. And all 3 songs we're going to do today are written by women as part of this. So let me set this up, and before I bring Matt and Sarah up here. This is an excerpt from the book talking about one of the most significant women in the history of the Broadway musical. And this is a name, this is not an obscure name, this is a name you might know, Dorothy Fields. But she's connected to this, and she, it's quite an amazing story that she has. So I say, and then there are the female inventors of the musical who often get left out or sidelined in the story. Of course, we can't celebrate the Broadway, actually this is what I wrote for today. Of course, we can't celebrate the Broadway musical without singing a few songs. We'll start with Dorothy Fields, who figures prominently in the book, first in a section titled, Ladies Don't Write Lyrics. So that's what I'm going to read to you now. Lyricist Dorothy Fields' amazing 50-year career stretched from the Silver Age to the modern era, from vaudeville to the age of rock. Utilizing her gift for natural direct language and her keen ear for slang, Fields wrote book and/or lyrics for 23 Broadway musicals, including some of the best-known standards in the American Songbook, and one of the best shows, Annie Get Your Gun. She was born into a show business dynasty. Her father was Lou Fields of the famous vaudeville team of Weber and Fields. Joe Weber and Lou Fields were both Polish Jewish immigrants. This is that incredible group of people like Irving Berlin who come, these children who come to America not speaking English, destitute, with no education, and end up inventing Broadway, American culture to a great extent. They both played a crucial role in the invention of the Broadway musical. Dorothy's brothers, Joseph Fields and Herbert Fields, were both significant Broadway artists as well. In fact, Herbert Fields is one of the most significant gay inventors of the musical. After retiring from performing, their father, Lou, became one of Broadway's most successful producers. And like many successful Broadway figures of his generation, he did everything he could to keep his children out of show business. However, he made the mistake of when he assigned young Dorothy the task of organizing his scrapbooks. She quickly became fascinated by what the critics had to say about what makes a show a hit, what material worked, and what didn't. She became obsessed with the inner workings of show business. A short time later, a friend suggested that she try her hand at writing lyrics, as she's a young woman in her early 20s at this point. After some trial and error, she teamed up with an Irish-American composer, Jimmy McHugh, to contribute songs to a low-budget revue. Her father, Lou Fields, attempted to put his foot down, proclaiming that ladies don't write lyrics. And just a little side note here. Dorothy responded with a snappy play on her father's most famous punchline, Apparently, Weber and Fields were the first to originate the joke among their many innovations and things that we still are dealing with today. They were the first to originate the joke, "Who was that lady I saw you with last night? That was no lady, that was my wife." Dorothy responded to her father by saying, "I'm not a lady, I'm your daughter." The song was cut before the show reached New York, but undaunted, the team, Dorothy and her partner, took it to producer Lou Leslie, originally Lou Lazinski, another Russian-Polish immigrant who became a very successful Broadway producer, and he hired them to write the entire score for Blackbirds of 1928. The song they wrote, that song that got cut and then became the centerpiece of Blackbirds, was not only one of the biggest hits of that year, it was also became one of the most recorded songs of the 20th century. Please welcome Sarah Rudinoff, accompanied by Mathew Wright, and with a song that kicked off Dorothy Fields' 53-year career on Broadway.
Gee, but it's tough to be broken. It's not a joke, kid. It's a curse. My life is changing. It's gotten from simply rotten to something worse. Who knows, someday I will win too. I'll begin to reach my pride. Now that I see what our end is, all I can spend is just my time. I can't give you anything but love, baby. That's the only thing I've plenty of, baby. Dream a while, scheme a while, you're sure to find happiness, and I guess all those things you've always pined for. Gee, I'd like to see you looking swell, my pretty baby. Diamond bracelets, Woolworth's doesn't sell, baby. Till that lucky day, you know darn well, baby, I can't give you anything but love. Till that lucky day, you know darn well, baby, I can't give you anything but love.
Sarah Rudinoff. So, just to give you an idea, Dorothy Fields will also write the lyrics to, I think my phone over there. Will write the lyrics to Big Spender in 1965. So that's the scope of her career. It's an amazing, and she even writes songs in the rock mode for her final show, which is Seesaw in the early 70s. Very successfully. Fantastic. I love Seesaw too. What next, Albert?
Next page is what's so this is a big subject, and it covers more than a century of history, which results in a big book. So level with us. How many pages of text have we about? The index is even more.
So it is a big book, and as you said, it's a big subject. What do I have there? 367 actual pages.
367.
Yeah, there's 367 pages of actual text, and then there's the notes and the bibliography and all that kind of stuff, which takes us up to over 400 pages. But it was, and of course, there were all along the way, I was trying to make sure the book wasn't 500 pages in text. So it's that constant process, and my editor was so helpful in shaping the book, and after I turned it in for the first draft, finished, complete draft, we did a lot of restructuring to, some of which I talked about earlier, how the book got structured. So that was really helpful, and it seemed to be the responses that it's very accessible and as quick a read as it can possibly be with a book that's as hefty as it is.
So David, before you actually entered the hallowed halls of academe, as the kids like to call it, you had more than a 40-year career in the professional theater, including 18 years in Seattle at the Fifth Avenue. And how has that experience influenced or been reflected in your book?
I think it's been really, really helpful because I haven't come at it just as a historian. I'm late to being a historian, although I was incredibly interested in history throughout my career. So two things, or maybe more than two. So many of the shows that I talk about in here, and the songs and everything else, and the people are shows that I have worked on at some point in my career, either directed in Summerstock or choreographed or produced at the Fifth Avenue Theater. So I've done more than, probably 150 shows in my lifetime. So, and most of the time, those were very prominent, successful shows that get done a lot. So that was helpful to be able to draw on that sort of inside knowledge of these shows. I know how those shows go. I know how audiences respond to them. And when I was working on them, I was fascinated with the history of them. So a lot of the history I started doing 30 years ago when I would do a production of Anything Goes or a production of Most Happy Fella or something like that. So I already knew, that was just my thing, and we were both fascinated with that, so we've talked about that over the years.
And didn't start out as a scholar, you started out really as a practitioner.
Totally.
Both as a director, as a performer.
Yeah, and also then, even more specifically because of my work at the Fifth Avenue Theater, and it makes me feel a little old to say this, but some of the shows that we were involved with, the new musicals, during the time I was there, we did 17 new musicals that we produced, 9 of which went to Broadway, and 2 of which won the Tony Award for Best Musical. And those shows, especially one in particular, are now, which is what makes me feel old, they're part of the history of the Broadway musical. So shows like Hairspray, which was the first big show that we did at the Fifth Avenue when I was there, that has gone on literally to become a centerpiece of the 21st century musical. It is now one of the great shows of the modern era. It was done on Broadway, it was then turned into a movie, it was then turned into a TV production, and it's produced it around the world. So it's actually has entered the canon. So what I got to do there, and again my editor encouraged me to do this, was to write from my own personal experience with that show. So I got to be part of that show from the very first demo recording arriving, being sent to me in the mail, and the first script of it, and then through the readings and the workshops and the very first production. We did the world premiere at the Fifth Avenue Theater, and experiencing the first audience to see the show. And I write about this in the book, two unforgettable nights in the theater, at least 2, but the very first performance. I try to take you back to the risk of producing the show at the time and the unlikely event that it would become a hit musical. It did not seem, no one thought this show would necessarily be a hit. It was based on a movie by John Waters, who was known for offending middle-class values, and a number of other elements elements about the show. None of the writers had ever written a Broadway show before except for one of the book writers. So it was an unlikely candidate to become what it has become. And to sit there with that audience at the first preview who has no idea what they're going to see, no understanding, and to have them then scream after the opening number, and then scream after every number that comes after it, and just be completely just in one night. This is so rare. It's a very rare show that out of the box just works on almost all fronts. There were some things that they had to work on and fiddle with. And then the other memorable night was 3 nights later when 300 members of the Seattle Men's Chorus were in the audience. Because they had bought a group for it. And so the audience was then amped up, the reaction was amped up even more so. And this sounds like a bad movie, but this and I say in the book, it may sound like I made this up, but it actually happened. I was there. At the end of the show, the audience just would not stop applauding. The actors took their bows, finished their curtain call, left the stage, and the audience would not leave the theater and not stop applauding until Harvey Fierstein, who was already in his dressing room and out of his costume, had to come back down to the stage, which is the Fifth Avenue. You're way upstairs. You have to come back down and take a bow in his robe before the audience would shut up. And that sounds, again, it sounds like a made-up story, but it actually happened. So I got to bring that to the book. And just to talk about the knowledge of talking about these shows, we're going to go to another song here. And this is a show that I got to produce at the Fifth Avenue Theater. And again, it gave me some inside knowledge of not only these shows, but these artists. So the second woman I want to highlight here today, who plays a big role in the book, is a woman named Betty Compton. And I'm incredibly proud to have produced a show called Wonderful Town at the Fifth Avenue Theater, which had book and lyrics co-written by this other dynamic woman of the theater, Betty Compton. In a remarkable career that began at the dawn of the Golden Age. So she's one of those people that alongside of Rodgers and Hammerstein is inventing this new idea, not working with them, but on the same wavelength. And we see that so much in history. Any new thing, we certainly saw this in all kinds of tech aspects. Any brand new invention, innovation that happens, there are usually multiple people working on the same idea at the same time. Even if they don't know each other, they're not in contact with one another. It's just in the zeitgeist. So Betty is one of those. So she began at the dawn of the Golden Era and thrived well into the modern era. Betty Compton and Adolph Green, her partner, wrote the script and her lyrics, usually both, for 17 Broadway musicals. Betty Compton was born Besa Cohan in Brooklyn, New York in 1917. Both of her parents were Russian Jewish immigrants. Adolph Green was born in the Bronx in 1914, and his parents were Hungarian Jewish immigrants. Working in collaboration with several of Broadway's greatest composers, including they wrote 2 shows with Leonard Bernstein, 9 with Julie Stein, and 2 shows with Cy Coleman, Compton and Green created a series of hit shows, including On the Town, Wonderful Town, Peter Pan, Bells Are Ringing, Applause, Lorelei, On the 20th Century, and the Will Rogers Follies. Meanwhile, they wrote the screenplays for several classic MGM film musicals, including what is widely considered to be the greatest movie musical of all time, Singin' in the Rain. Unchallenged as the longest-running act on Broadway, Compton and Green were in a category all their own. Many people assumed they were married, and they were, just not to each other. For 6 decades, they met every morning and set to work. No matter what was going on, they met every single weekday morning. As Compton described it in 1977, we meet whether or not we have a project, just to keep up the continuity of working. We have a theory that nothing is wasted, even those long days of just staring at one another. Their belief was that you had to go through all of that to get to the day when something would happen. Green contributed the team's success to Betty. She was always unforgivably responsible, he said. She is always on time for everything while I am late for anything. I've lived for years in the shadow of an overwhelming suspicion that our collaborations have in reality reality been solo efforts written by Betty alone. Without her, I'm nothing. Comden, however, insisted that everything they did was together. We don't divide up the work. We develop a mental radar, bounce lines off one another, and she added that she could not imagine life without their collaboration. All of the musicals that Comden and Green created feature strong female characters, much like Betty herself, who are all vibrant, transgressive women who break the rules and defy the conventions of their day. Sarah Rudinoff starred in that production of Wonderful Town at the Fifth Avenue, and we're going to ask her back now to sing the sort of signature song of one of those characters that Betty Comden created, in this case Ruth Sherwood, and who is a writer also. And I hear Betty when I hear this song. I think I can, you just imagine that this is the philosophy, it's one of the philosophies of Betty Comden coming forward.
Get Ruth Sherwood's new bestseller, 100 Easy Ways to Lose a Man. Chapter 1. Now the first way to lose a man. You've met a charming fellow and you're out for a spin. The motor fails and he just wears a helpless grin. Don't bat your eyes and say, what a romantic spot we're in. Just leap out, crawl into the car, tell him it's the gasket, and fix it in 2 seconds flat with a bobby pin. That's a good way to lose a man. He takes you to a baseball game, you sit knee to knee. He says, the next man up at bat will bunt, you'll see. Don't say, ooh, what's a bunt? This game's too high for little me. Just say, bunt. Are you nuts? With no outs, 2 men on base, and a left-handed batter coming up, he'll walk right into a triple play, just like it happened in the 5th game of the World Series in 1923. That's a sure way to lose a man. A sure way to lose a man. A splendid way to lose a man. Just throw your knowledge in his face. He'll never try for second base. 98 ways to go. The third way to lose a man. The lifeguard at the beach that all the girlies adore swims bravely out to save you through the ocean's roar. Don't say, oh, thanks, I would have drowned in just 1 second more. Just shove his head into the water, scream, last one in, around leg, and race him back to shore. That's a swell way to lose a man. You found your perfect mate, and it's been love from the start. He whispers, you're the one to whom I give my heart. Don't say, I love you too, my dear. Let's never, ever. Just say, I'm afraid you've made a grammatical error. You see, it's not to who I give my heart, it's to whom I give my heart. You see, with the use of the preposition to, who becomes the indirect object, making the use of whom imperative, which I can easily show you by drawing a simple chart. That's a fine way to lose a man. A fine way to lose a man. A dandy way to lose a man. Just be more well-informed than he. You'll never hear, oh, promise me. Just show him where his grammar errs. Then mark your towels, hers and hers. Yes, girls, you too can lose your man if you will use Ruth Sherwood's plan. 100 easy ways to lose a man.
Sarah Rudinoff. So I want to point out we have a phrase in the theater called luxury casting, which means when the smaller parts in a show are cast with really, really fine actors. And we have a really, really fine, a luxury casting of our pianist today. amazing artistic director of Arts West Theater, just in, yeah, so never underestimate who's playing the piano. It might be an artistic director. Thank you both.
Well, it's always good to have something to fall back on. So one of the challenges of writing a history of anything is if that history is an ongoing history. It's not, so in this book, it's not like you're writing the decline of the Roman Empire or...
Right.
You know,
The Roman Empire ended, but the Broadway musical is still continuing.
Marches on.
Yeah.
So, at least to some extent, every book is actually out of date.
By the time it comes out, yeah.
So how did you deal with that? What is your master plan here?
So that was a challenge because you do think, once you write a book, it has to then be published, it has to be printed. And so you're talking about a 9-month process at least between the day your final draft is approved and before you'll see the book. So I was worried about that and trying to figure out the ending, the last chapters of the book. And I kept begging the publishers to not give me more time, but to give me a little leeway where the final chapters could be handed in late in the process after I knew what was going on and they could start, working on the rest of it. Of course, there was a limit to that, but I wanted to know what was the results of this most recent Tony Awards were. And so that I could incorporate, at least respond to that. So, and I was able to do that. There was information that gets us up to the 2024 Tony Awards. And there's not a lot of information about that, or a lot based on that, because I didn't have the leeway to do that. But I was able to get it as current as I possibly could. But yes, you're right. It's everything that happened in the last 9 months or so is not in the book. And, but that's also why I have a podcast and other things to be able to talk about it.
So Sarah's going to sing one more song, and it's probably the most up-to-date song that you could possibly do.
Absolutely. Do we want to take any questions from the audience before we do that? Anybody
Sure.
have any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
The New York Times wrote a thing just this last week about capitalization of the Broadway musical from this last season. Every show $20 million, not one would make it $1. Do you see somebody coming up with new shows besides all these bloody Chicago musicals that might say something new?
I do, and I'll comment a little bit about that article if people saw it. First of all, not to discount everything that the article was saying, but the New York Times writes that same article every 10 years. Maybe every 5 years. So almost the exact same. The musical is dead, the Broadway is dead article. You can just go back and compare them. In fact, I had a friend who has a blog who did came up with excerpts from all these different earlier versions of that same article. And would say, here's what the New York Times said. And they said, oh, no, that was Walter Kerr back in 1947, So, but the reality is that it's a very challenging art form, and I talk about this a little bit in the book. I don't go into the economics of Broadway in depth, but there are a couple times I do get there, especially in the final section. The reality, and it's this weird dichotomy, the most successful entertainment property in the history of the world is a Broadway musical. So, and I mean that, so and that is The Lion King. The Lion King, and not including any of the movie versions of The Lion King, or any other media. This is just the Broadway stage version and its incarnations around the world. The stage production of that has grossed more money than any other entertainment property, more than Avatar, more than all the Star Wars films put together, more than literally anything else in the entertainment world, a lot more. The second most successful, highest grossing entertainment property in the history of the world is also a Broadway musical, Phantom of the Opera. And which is hard to believe when you say that to people who are in Hollywood or things like that, and they go, well, that can't be true. It's absolutely true. Again, not based on any other media, just the stage productions. What's also true at the same time is that only 1 out of every 5 Broadway musicals ever returns its investment. So, which is partly where this article is coming from. It is a very challenging art form to get right and to have it be successful. Partly because, unlike most other business enterprises, you can't beta test it in any way. The only way to know whether it's going to be successful is to mount the show and get it on and see if anybody shows up, and then you spent the $20 million. Because it is impossible to test the product in any other way than on stage in front of an audience. You can do that in small versions of it, workshops and things, but they really don't tell you the story. They don't really indicate necessarily whether it's going to work. You had a question.
Well, I thought a lot of New York productions were shown in
Seattle.
To see what maybe needed to be fixed.
Absolutely. I mean, and then we did a lot of that at Fifth Avenue, and Seattle Rep has done that with many shows. Come From Away is a good example of which started. We did the workshop at the Fifth Avenue, and then the production was at the Seattle Rep. But 90% of that money you already spent to put it up at the Seattle Rep. So the majority of that, it's all labor. The cost of a show is labor. It's a labor-intensive business and industry, and you can't do it without the people, and you can't do it without the time it takes to do it. So yes, and yes, there are additional expenses. The show, if Come From Away, did not reach audiences and wasn't clear that it was going to be, audiences were going to be interested in this at the Seattle Rep. It probably would not have gone to Broadway, and they would have saved all the marketing costs and there would have been a level of expense that would not have happened. But the bulk of it already has to be spent just to get it on. And the advantage is you have to see it with professional artists in front of a paying audience, or you don't know what you have. And then it takes a while to figure it out. The hardest part of figuring out a show is what happens once the show is on at the Seattle Rep or the Fifth Avenue. What if it's firing on almost all things, but not all of them? How you fix that and how you affect that in the time you have before you have to take it to Broadway is really what separates the hits from the flops in a way. Well, great questions. Anybody have a question? Anybody else? Yeah.
It's kind of out of left field, but I have a real interest in the blues and jazz. And if you go to early blues, the fact that so many people had phonographs and a lot of black artists were selling hundreds of thousands of copies of blues songs and whatnot. And kind of aligned with your book, I was wondering if technology is something you ever thought about with the Broadway musical, like the phonograph, television, movies.
Totally. The book is really as much about the history of America as it is about the history of the Broadway, because things are reflecting each other, interacting along the way, and affecting one another, and technology absolutely affects. I'll just give one example. The original cast album is part of what makes this transition into the golden age of Broadway, because that's when that first becomes a thing. They had done it a little bit in the UK prior to that, but Oklahoma in many ways is the first show to be recorded as an original cast album, an album that was on 78s in those days. So literally an album where you would, you page, I remember if you've seen those, but it's basically an album of records, and you take one out, and in those days you could put them on your record player, and they would play in order. If they dropped down, and you turn them over, so they weren't necessarily, you didn't have side 1 and side 2 on the back of side 1. You had side 5 on the back of side 1, so you could play them in order. But what was so incredible about the impact of that is it suddenly spread Oklahoma across the country. It became one of the, if you ever go to an antique store, you'll probably find a recording of Oklahoma in the 78s, because so many of them were sold. They're worth nothing today as an antique, because they were just so ubiquitous. Every home in America had the album. So whether you ever came to see Broadway or ever came to the theater to see it, people knew the show and knew the characters and experienced it. So it completely changed not only the success, part of why it ran so long and was such a hit, but it also changed people's access to Broadway. And so that's one great example of exactly what you're talking about. The technology really really helped to make the golden age of Broadway. Let's take one more question if we have time. Yeah?
I'm not ask this succinctly, but Hamilton.
Hamilton.
So my dad saw My Fair Lady, saw Barbra Streisand, I think most of my parents, we saw everything. He couldn't understand Hamilton. My sister's kids loved Hamilton, and they were even teenagers. They knew every single word. You couldn't go into a car with my kids' friends without hearing Hamilton. So how did that, we felt like Hamilton, Obama, it meant something different in the world, and now are we seeing Hamilton? How are we going to see, what's happening at Kennedy Center? I'm trying to ask you, delicately ask you about this transformation between Hamilton and now.
I mean, it's so interesting that certainly Hamilton is a phenomenon. It's the most successful musical of the 21st century. Still today, still to this day, still wildly sells out every performance, sells out everywhere it performs in the world. They did decide not to go to the Kennedy Center because of the changes that are happening there. And the producers are probably taking a giant loss to make that, to have that happen. They will play in DC and probably at the Forest Theater, I forget which theater that is in DC. But what's interesting, and I didn't get a chance today to talk about the themes of the Broadway musical, but I will now just set up this song. The last section of my book, after we get through the whole history of the Broadway, is about what I call the 3 principal themes of the Broadway musical. So as part of the research that I did and the analysis is what are shows about? And I identified 3 themes that dozens and dozens and dozens of shows deal with. So these are definitely the 3 most ubiquitous themes of the Broadway musical. One of them is what I call transgressive women, women who do not do what society is telling them to do, either in the story in which the musical's in the time period of the story in which the musical happens, or even in the time period in which the musical is produced. They are actively rebelling against society, and the audience and the musical celebrate them for this. This is what we love about Broadway musicals, whether we're aware of that or not. And musicals are singularly focused on working women, single working women, at least at the beginning of the story, in a way that no other media during the same period was, where women are adjuncts to men in many ways. They're either wives or mothers or daughters. That's not true of the Broadway musical for 90% of the shows. They are single working women who are out there rebelling against the world. Number 2 is community, is the vital importance of creating communities that function well and are holistic and that just work. There's another word I'm looking for there. But and what's interesting about that theme is that it seems like, and again, dozens and dozens, probably 30, 40 different musicals deal with this. What they seem to be telling us is in order to achieve that, in order to achieve a healthy, organic, holistic community, we all have to give something up. Both of the warring sides have to meet in the middle and be willing to give something up in order to get there, which is something that doesn't seem really in tune with our times at the moment, but is part of what musicals are about. And then to your final point, the third theme is issues of equity, diversity, inclusion, in all kinds of ways. And again, and so many shows deal with all 3 of those at the same time, or at least 2, but a lot of 3. And that is true from Showboat to today, and still seems to be at the centerpiece. And so it gives me and Hamilton is right there with that, with all 3 of those in a way. And Wicked is right there with all 3 of those. What will be the biggest movie event this year will be the second half of Wicked, which just the fact that they made 2 movies out of it, and both, and from what I hear from people involved, the second movie will probably, very likely to win the Academy Award this year, because it just has that much impact and devastation. And all three of those themes there, she's green. The story is about prejudice, is about racial prejudice. It's about a woman literally who's defying gravity and two women defying their culture. And it's a story about fascism. It's about a society heading toward fascism and how the community must come together to save it from that. So to me, what is so remarkable and why I can have such passion about these shows is that that's what the subject matter is. That is what musicals are. People think of them as sort of silly, frivolous things. And actually, what's underneath that really entertaining and glossy and sparkly surface are these really deep and important themes. And I love to be able to share that with people. And there's a lot about Hamilton in the book. We're going to end with one song which, from another show, deals with those things. And if you didn't get to see it, you'd have to rush out of here now and try to get to see it tonight at the Fifth Avenue Theater because it's the final performance. We're going to end with a song written by one of Broadway's most recent Tony Award-winning women. Shana Taub is her name. She wrote the book, the music, and the lyrics for the musical Suffs, which is currently playing its national tour at the Fifth Avenue Theater. And this is another musical that combines all three of those themes, that not only honors Broadway's past, but demonstrates that the Broadway musical itself is going to keep marching into the future. Please welcome back Sarah Rudinoff and Matt Wright.
Maybe no one gets to reach that perfect day. If the work is never over, then how do you keep marching anyway? Do you carry your banner as far as you can, rewriting the world with your imperfect pen, till the next stubborn girl picks it up in a picket line over and over again, and you join in the chorus of centuries chanting to her, the path will be twisted and risky and slow, but keep marching, keep marching. Will you fail or prevail? Well, you may never know, but keep marching, keep marching. 'Cause your ancestors are all the proof you need that progress is possible, not guaranteed. It will only be made if you keep marching on. Keep marching on. Keep marching on. And remember every mother that you came from. Learn as much from our success as our mistakes. Don't forget you're merely one of many others on the journey every generation makes. We did not end in justice and neither will you, but still we made strides, so we know you can too. Make peace with our incomplete power and use it for good, 'cause there's so much to do. The gains will feel small and the loss is too large. Keep marching, keep marching. You'll rarely agree with whoever's in charge. Keep marching, 'cause your ancestors are all the proof you need that progress is possible, not guaranteed. It will only be made if we keep marching on. Keep marching on. Yes, the world can be changed
just 2 years ago. Thank you so much. Thank you, Albert Evans.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Allison. I'll be happy to sign as many books as anybody who wants a book. I'm very, very happy to sign them today. Thank you so much for coming.